It all starts with a vision, the foresight to see the possibilities ahead, and the brilliant ingenuity to bring it to life, and the skill to make the impossible possible. It is understanding your role and using it to shape the way forward. It is to recognize the freedom of creativity. It's having the ability to be bold, yet stay relevant through the years by creating forms that are meaningful and lasting. Built to beautify your life, built for you to thrive. It is this spirit of perfection and wanting better that fuels our purpose at Nations Trust Bank. A philosophy that drives us to be more than a bank and recognize our ability to shape life's present and future by building relationships that endure. Shaped the right way, shaped for better. Nations Trust Bank. Trust in better.
Good evening, everyone. Just a quick comment to say, recently, Akram, his wife Shamila, myself and my wife Geraldine, we had the opportunity to be in Kenya and to meet Ian Douglas Hamilton and his wife Oria. Ian unfortunately was just coming out of some major illness and is still recuperating. But when we got into a discussion around elephants, as you know, both of them are colossals and giants, much awarded, respected in the world of elephant conservation. They were a bit taken aback to hear about the sad state of affairs for elephants here. And so we said, why don't you give a message to the Sri Lankans on this? So we just used a phone and recorded a very short blurb, and that's what we'd like to run for you.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be able to speak to you from my farm in Naivasha in Kenya. I have been to Sri Lanka, so I feel very close to everybody here. And we've had a lunch. During lunch, we were talking about elephants. And when I was in Sri Lanka, I did go and visit the elephants. I've just heard that you're losing between 400 and 500 elephants a year in Sri Lanka, which I find difficult to believe because that's a lot of elephants that you're losing. And that's a great shame because you're losing animals that have gone through a lot of experiences, and you're removing all those experiences which they can pass on to the younger ones. I really hope that something will be done so that you can reduce the number from 400 to 300 to 200 to eventually 50. But even 50, okay, 50 can die of disease or old age, but not 400 or 500. I was very shocked to hear that. And I hope that you can get together and find a way to keep them alive. When you get to know them as well as we do, you will see that there are a lot of similarities with elephant lives and our lives. And especially when you're dealing with families and little elephant babies and the care that they have when they have to look after these babies. But the same thing will happen. It happens in Sri Lanka because even though they're Asian elephants, they're very similar to our elephants. So I hope that you will continue to look after what you've got. It's a very, very precious animal. You're lucky to have them. And so you have to look after them and try to allow them to expand a bit, because they need the closeness and the friendliness of elephants around them. Anyway, it was lovely talking to you, and I hope I'll see more of you here in Naivasha, where we all are. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hopefully when we all get to 90, we'll be as passionate about conservation. So thanks.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce the two speakers today. Well, not much to say about Sumit Pilapitia in terms of an introduction. Everybody knows who he is, a colossus in our country for this context of human-elephant conflict and elephants. There's a blurb written by Spencer, which I will kind of avoid and just go on what I have to say. Sumit spends most of his time learning and working with elephants and their behavior, and goes around talking and gives a lot of advice in terms of to organizations like us and as well as others about elephant behavior and what we should be doing. Is also on two committees of the government to see how we can reduce our human-elephant conflict in the country. As you know, he's a former DG of the wildlife, and we welcome him back to speak with us today. Thank you, Sumit. Dr. Tempe Adams, again, has been with us before. This is her third trip to Sri Lanka. She is one of our mentors on our light ripple system and our scientific document that we are putting out. On top of all that, she does work closely with the Human-Elephant Conflict Subcommittee at WNPS. Dr. Tempe is Australian by birth, working with the University of New South Wales, and is spending about 15 years in Botswana. But she has experience with African elephants as a whole, and has spent even just recently just come out of a trip in Zambia, and which hopefully she might share some thoughts on the elephants there and the whole landscape of Africa, where Botswanan elephants are Zimbabwean elephants or Namibian elephants because they cross borders. And so we hope we have a fantastic lecture today and a good learning. Thank you very much. Sumit, you're first on the track. No? Sorry, Dr. Tempe, you're first on.
Good evening, everybody. Firstly, I just want to say how honoured I am to be a return invited lecturer. When they asked me back again, I said, "Are you sure, guys?" And they were like, "Come on back, come on back." But I was really wanting to share the podium, and that's why we are changing it up a little bit, because I think we're celebrating elephants. This is in celebration of World Elephant Day, which did happen about a week ago, but we should always be celebrating elephants. But I thought it would be really lovely to have a shared perspective of Asian elephant conflict and African elephant conflict and how we need to all be working together on that. So thank you so much for WNPS for inviting me back. Thank you so much for the sponsors for making this all happen. Yeah, it's a real honor. So let's kick it off. The long, complicated road from conflict to coexistence. Here we go. So the current African elephant range is around 3 million square kilometres. This is for the whole continent of Africa, of which obviously 57% falls, interestingly, outside of protected areas. And this is an interesting figure that was an estimate of where the elephant range was at the at the beginning of the 19th century. So it was estimated that we had around 27 million elephants. So we have two different species of elephants in Africa. We have forest elephants and we also have savanna elephants. And this is their current estimated range. So as you can see, we've lost a lot. Interestingly, I know the maps are a little bit small, but the darker red is where they've recently gone extinct in the last 30 years. And then the orange is their existing known residential range. The forest elephants are still existing in 20 different countries, and the savanna elephants in 23 different countries. But as you can very clearly see, our elephants are reducing at quite a rapid rate, which is incredibly alarming. So there was a study that was produced just 3 years ago, but I thought it had some really, really interesting results, and it was using GPS collared data from over 229 elephants across the African continent. They were really trying to understand the range and where elephants are moving at that sort of massive landscape level. And we really wanted to see what the sort of human footprint and that impact was on the elephant range, as it's obviously the big indicator as to, and biggest impact that elephants are having, that humans are having on elephants. So what we found was 62% of the African continent is actually potential elephant habitat, but elephants are only using 17% of that. So that's tiny. And 85% of the potential elephant habitat actually lies outside of our existing protected areas. So it definitely begs the question that maybe we need to figure out and maybe change the boundaries of where we're actually protecting, because maybe that's actually not suitable habitat for elephants. Everyone loves to talk about numbers, so I felt like I did need to have some numbers put up there. So for the whole continent, the estimate, and it is from 2016, so it is a little age, but around 410,000. Obviously, there's confidence intervals around that. But this is for the whole continent, and this is combined savanna and forest elephants. We are trying to work on coming up with a forest elephant population estimate. It's due to be coming out at the end of this year. So we're all waiting with bated breath on that. But there has been, as I said, a decline of 50% in the last 30 years. So this decline is rapidly increasing. Obviously, Southern Africa is our stronghold. That's my home, that's where I live, and I've been working, as Gian said, for the last 15 years. And my home is the heart of elephant range, roughly 130,000 elephants we have in Botswana. So we are responsible for a very large chunk of what is left of the African elephant population. Zimbabwe is second in line, but what's really interesting about our population is obviously the responsibility that bears, but our population has actually remained stable for the last 10 years. That's reflected in both DWMP data and also Elephants Without Borders, which was the NGO I previously worked for's data. So our population in Botswana is stable. But as was alluded to by Jihan, what's, I think, the key difference between Sri Lanka and Botswana and the way we must manage it is, obviously, Botswana is a landlocked country. We're not a beautiful island. And our elephants are our neighbours' elephants. They're also Zimbabwe's elephants. They're also Angola's elephants, Zambia's elephants. And this part of the world that's, it's referred to as the Kaza area, the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Park, which was a proposed park encompassing the elephant population that we have existing in Southern Africa. And there's over 290,000 elephants in that area. So it's a huge, huge, very significant population of African elephants. And the plan is, and what we're really proposing to do, is manage it at a landscape level like this, not country by country. So it is a work in progress, but this is the way we kind of need to be seeing the management and how we implement the management in our area. So the blue is the beautiful blue and red on the map there. Sorry, it is a little small. That is 291 combined GPS locations of elephants over the course of 2010 to now. That's their movement data. The blue is bulls and the red are female cows. So as you can see, we have a huge amount of cross-border movement. So it's really, really, the elephants themselves actually defined the Kaza area that we're protecting. So the elephants dictated where we need to be focusing our efforts on. But obviously, synchronizing different countries' policies can be very problematic. So not too surprisingly, I think a lot of us are very aware of it. The key threats to elephants: habitat fragmentation. This is the town I live in, Kasani. There is a herd of elephants right on the edge of the town there, and is undergoing everywhere in the world. We've got rapid land use change as the human population is increasing. That's putting, so we're urbanizing more areas, we're converting a lot of things for agricultural growth and development, which is obviously reducing protected areas, and it's also closing off key wildlife corridors. So it's slicing up and fragmenting the protected areas and the wildlife areas, which is having a hugely detrimental impact. We also have, throughout Africa, increased pressure from livestock grazing. So livestock and elephants are actually competing. This is a big issue in East Africa and Zambia and parts of Zimbabwe, and actually increasingly in Botswana, where actually our cattle numbers are increasing substantially, and they're eating a lot of the grass that the elephants are needing, which is pushing elephants to then eat more trees, and then we're getting a lot of tree destruction and deforestation by elephants, which fuels more frustration towards elephants. The illegal ivory trade is obviously still very rampant in Africa. Obviously, both our males and female elephants do have tusks, so they're all up for poaching and very vulnerable to poaching. In 1989, we had a very famous ban put on the legal trade of ivory, because a lot of countries had these huge, you can see in the image there, big ivory stocks. So in 1989, that ended. However, the illegal trade is, as I said, rampant, and it's estimated that we're losing 82 elephants a day to the illegal poaching. I do think that's even an underestimate, but it is obviously very hard to get clear data on this. And obviously climate change. This is the big topic that everyone needs to be addressing. Right now in northern Botswana, we're going through a horrific drought. Kenya just recently came out of a very horrific drought. We're seeing more and more elephants relying on water. We're looking at artificial water holes and putting them in different places, but that can then lead to other issues. So this is something that I feel like we all really need to be looking at and addressing, especially because the projections in our part of the world in Southern Africa is just a solid increase of temperatures. So that's obviously going to have big implications for all elephants, but specifically the very elderly elephants and the young calves and perishing. And that finally brings us to coexistence, our last big threat, and debatably the biggest threat. So I just put up a very simple definition of what human-wildlife conflict coexistence is. And it's the struggle, it's basically the direct and perceived interaction that threatens human lives and wildlife's lives. I think it's really important to note there's different levels of conflict. Sometimes I think classically we think of crop raiding. I think that's the most common form of conflict that everyone talks about and discusses. So that's kind of the first level, which we often refer to as a dispute. So there can be conflict over damage to a property, human safety, threatens to income, and it's threatening your livelihoods. However, there's often underlying conflicts, and these are often the more forgotten things that we need to be mitigating. So sometimes there's a reoccurring history or issue. Potentially someone's just not received compensation rates, for instance, so then they're starting to feel more distrust towards government. And then there's or government, whoever is paying for the compensation. And then there's a next level, which is a deep-rooted conflict, and these are often linked to social values and cultural values. Unfortunately, level 2 and 3 are often, as I said, not really determined or well understood when trying to mitigate elephant conflict. And it's definitely something that I think we all need to, especially as practitioners of this, really need to do a deep dive in understanding. Conflict is always unique and changing. It varies in different place to place. But as I said, understanding the drivers is really, really important. And they're always changing through time. And I think it's interesting, I did an interview just before here, and they were like, I feel like it's the most common question we often get asked, but people will say, well, what's the solution? And I'm like, there is no one solution. It's a combination of solutions and something that we've always got to be working towards. But these solutions that we do come up with are definitely needing to be tested and trialled before investment is made. Just because it worked really well in one country or one area doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work really well in another area. It should be trialled. And I think those on the front line of the conflict need to be a part of that. They need to be part of creating those policies and management. Otherwise, it's never going to work. This was just an interesting study that was published this year, and someone actually went through all the literature that has been published on human-elephant conflict thus far around the world. Not too surprisingly, India leads the charge with the highest amount of published results on what we call HEC, followed by Kenya, and then followed by Botswana. And the most common answer that people actually said was really effective was community awareness programs. So I thought that was a really interesting review. Conflict definitely takes a holistic approach. I feel like holistic, the word holistic, I keep hearing it over and over again, but it is true. We all need to be working together on it. So I think it's really important to obviously understand the layers and the complexity of the conflict you're dealing with. There is obviously lots of different types of it, so you need to understand where and how your elephants are moving through certain areas and how that's changing through time. You need to develop the mitigation strategies with the community themselves. But the key thing is if you help people, then you help elephants. Solutions often lie in the knowledge of understanding of the people on the forefront rather than necessarily the elephants. The common challenges that we face, assumption is a common one that money solves everything. Often money causes more problems in my experience of what we've been seeing. Again, people want quick fixes. Funding cycles can often be too short to actually have sustainable solutions. There's often welfare, which is handing out money versus actually empowering people. There can be a big lack of community input and buy-in, so a lot of policies are sort of pushed on the frontline people dealing with the conflict. Lack of monitoring and ongoing support. I've seen that sadly time and time again. People have come in, invested in a community, and then there's been no ongoing support, no follow-up. No checking in. So you've really got to build up that trust in those communities. And unfortunately, politics can always be at play. There can be lots of false promises made, and that can create more resentment. So what are the solutions? I thought I'd just take some time to go through some really interesting, very positive, out-of-the-box sort of solutions. Some are out-of-the-box sort of solutions to mitigate conflict, not just from Botswana, but actually throughout Africa. So understanding elephant movement ecology is fundamental. I've published a number of papers on this. We do this by putting out GPS collars on elephants. That map up in the top corner is 4 different elephant movements over the course of 2 years. This gives us the best idea to understand where, why, and how often they go to certain places. So that can be a great indicator. I think what's really interesting in that map is that white area above is Namibia. And obviously the coloured area is Botswana, and I think you can clearly see those elephants are not moving into Namibia, and there is no fence line. So it's, it begs the question, why? Why are they not moving into Namibia? So that's really important. And then I've also used a number of camera traps to monitor elephants' presence in different areas, specifically in wildlife corridors. And I've done a lot of work comparing urban corridors and agricultural corridors and how different human-dominated landscapes actually impact elephants' use of those corridors. Again, that's the best kind of evidence to put to land use planners. This is to say, look, this is how important this corridor is. We need to keep this open. If you close it off, you're only going to increase conflict. So that's what we've been trying to work on. This is kind of one of the best forms of long-term mitigation for human-elephant conflict. It's taken a lot of different forms. We have 2 pretty successful examples in Botswana where we have monitored both agricultural wildlife corridors and urban wildlife corridors in northern Botswana, and we've had them now defined in land use plans where no one can develop anymore on those areas. And people that are farming in those areas are being offered other land to relocate. And we have also had strategies where those corridors have been blocked. Suddenly we've seen a big increase in conflict. There's a lot of incidences that occurred, so it gave us the best kind of evidence to show, let's understand where they're moving through and help try and protect those areas. This is, some people don't see this as a mitigation, but I think we need to start changing our mindset with that. Education is key. This is examples of different tips and tricks to living with elephants, produced by 3 different NGOs. One's from Namibia, 2 are from Botswana, and they're in multiple languages. And I think this all came about from the district that I live in. It's an area where a lot of people are moving in because there's a lot of jobs within tourism, because the tourism industry is now back to booming. But a lot of those people don't come from a wildlife area. So a lot of the conflict is coming about from people literally not knowing what to do when they're walking to work and they might see an elephant, when they're driving to work, they might see an elephant, when they're in their house and there's an elephant in their garden. So this is about giving people access to information on how do you deal with that, and what numbers can you call for support? This has been so effective in making people feel empowered. And I think that in itself is a very successful form of mitigation. Then to take it one step forward, we actually, I did a study a little while ago trying to figure out where people get their information from, and the radio was a really, really popular one. So then we decided I was like, okay, radio, how can we get the message out on the radio? So as a collaboration we have a Botswana Human-Wildlife Conflict Working Group, so all of us practitioners and different stakeholders working on conflict resolution come together as a working group. We created jingles for the radio, because jingles just stay in your head, and we played them over community radio across the country. We made jingles for predators, conflict, elephant and crocodiles and hippos. So that's where those are the animals that we get the most incidences with. And I have a jingle to play for you guys. So we created them in English and then Setswana as well. I'll obviously play you the English one, not the Setswana one. And we got a local very, very popular band to record it and do the recording. So let me see if it will work, hopefully.
When you're working, let the animals hear that you close and coming nearer. They might tend to fear you. Gotta let them know that you're nearer. See a predator, stand your ground. Don't you run, you turn around. Freeze face and avert your gaze. Gotta back up slowly to a safer place. If it charges, raise your arms. Talk to it, be nice and calm. Helps you keep yourself from harm. You gotta be wise to stay alive. If you move at night, shine your light. Go in groups, you'll be alright. Be wise to stay alive.
So it's a bit of fun, but it was really effective. People were very excited for it. We're still actually trying to find more funding to keep it going. Unfortunately, that was the predator one. For some reason, I couldn't download the elephant one for you guys today. But just to give you guys a little bit of a taster of trying to think outside the box, how can we get the message out? How can we make it fun? And it does. And we tried to make something that would really get in your head.
When you're working, let the animal.
We've heard it enough. That's enough. So this is a recent study that I've just actually launched, but I thought to myself, what is the most obvious form of conflict that we often kind of overlook? And I think it's roadkill. Unofficially, again, in the district I'm living in, it's hard pressed to find someone that grew up there that hasn't had a family member that's died in a car accident hitting wildlife. So in order for us to come up with any kind of solution for this road issue is we need the data, and we don't really have access to that data. And not to mention, we also have critically endangered animals. There's an image of a wild dog there. They're the second most threatened carnivore species in Africa killed on roads. So I thought, why can't I get a citizen science reporting app up and going so people around the country or tourists around the country can report roadkill? So quite a simple premise. It's been very successful in South Africa, so I've been doing quite a lot of work to see what's the best way to get it out there. So I have created a project within an app called iNaturalist. So anyone for free can download that and they can contribute data. I've also set up like a roadkill hotline in Botswana. And it's with the effort to try and collect as much data as possible and work out what's dying where, and then we can have the data to come up with road safety campaigns to try and reduce that impact. It is something that I've also been chatting to WNPS about, trying to get that going within Sri Lanka. And I think we're on the cusp of getting it going, which is very exciting and a great collaboration. This was a really interesting study that was actually done in Tanzania in Ruaha National Park. It's a very large national park in Tanzania. And it's about a lot of the time the communities will complain that they have no benefit from living alongside these wildlife. And there was an NGO called Lion Landscapes Project there that had been working in the community for a very long time, and they just felt like all their efforts of trying to mitigate the conflict were failing. So they thought, what can we do that makes the community get involved and feel like they're benefiting? So they came up with what was a camera trapping program. So they spoke to the local authorities and they said, look, we'd really love to put some camera traps up to try and find out what you have coming through your area, what wildlife you have in the area, and then what we're going to actually try and do. So they decided, they had multiple meetings with community leaders and the community themselves, and they said, what we're going to do is actually create a system And it was a competition between 4 different villages. That's how it started out. And they said, you know, that they're going to come up with a point system, so more animals and more wildlife you capture on your camera traps in your community areas, the more benefits you get. Not monetary benefits, but things that the community wanted. So one community said they wanted a deep freeze, so they could actually go and freeze their frozen goods that they've bought in the market. So it was rewarding, and it was on every month they would be rewarded based on the animals, the number of animals that they actually captured on their camera traps in each of the villages. And the more endangered the animal is, the more points they got. So they were literally being rewarded for having photos of wildlife in their community areas. And it was hugely, hugely successful. I think it's a very cool, genius sort of project. And the community decided where they wanted to put the camera traps. They would rotate the locations that they had them in. But it was a really successful way that they were literally benefiting from just leaving the wildlife be and actually embracing the fact that they had wildlife in their community. And it was a great way to monitor exactly what wildlife they had coming through. It was a way that the community obviously could benefit. And the community had ownership in the process of that. They actually had ownership in the project itself. So it's still to this day a very successful program. There's also other strategies that are occurring throughout Asia as well, but creating elephant economies. So coming up with businesses that are associated with living alongside elephants and tolerating elephants. We have lots of these sort of businesses growing in Botswana, and different NGOs. Ecoexist, Elephants Without Borders and Elephants for Africa are 3 NGOs that are sort of working towards getting these going. A great example, creating elephant education plays, productions that tourists will come and see, creating tourist attractions where you actually really go and visit a village and understand how people are living alongside those animals. People are more and more curious about these things, where the community themselves directly benefit from that economic income from those tourists coming to the area. One of the really inventive ideas is a craft brewery. Okavango Craft Brewery is a beer that actually goes and buys millet, which is our locally grown grain, from the farmers that are a part of an elephant-friendly mitigation project. So no elephants were killed in the making of that beer, and it's marketed as such. And they pay them extra for their millet to be contributed to the beer. So they're, again, directly benefiting by not killing those elephants and making more money off of it. And then focusing on actually improving farming practices. A lot of the farmers in our area were not, as an underlying conflict, was actually the issue was not necessarily about elephants. It was actually about their frustration in the lack of support they had in improving their farming skills. So this is becoming a really popular thing, conservation agriculture, and giving people the tips and tricks to improve their actual produce, to increase their yields that they're growing, diversify crops, and soil improvement, simple things. And actually farmers found that they were becoming more tolerant of elephants when they actually got more support and actually learning how to farm their land in a more improved way. And then finally, I think the power of perception is really important. I did a study a number of years ago in Botswana, just looking at the nation's opinions and perceptions of elephants and elephant management, and it was something that hadn't been done before. I'm actually about to launch another study like this, but comparing 2 different districts that have got very different histories with elephants, because I think that this is probably some of the most impactful, helpful research that I've come up with that's now been incorporated into the Botswana Elephant Management Plan. But what was really interesting about the results is I started off by just asking people, do you like elephants? And I was shocked to see a resounding yes, given that a lot of the media was very much the opposite of that. And I asked them, why do you like seeing elephants? And a lot of people, the most popular answer was, they're associated with their national heritage. You think of Botswana and you think of elephants. So I thought that was very interesting. But then I really there was a lot of different questions that were asked, but I thought it was very interesting. I asked people if they're aware that we have an elephant management plan. The people that were aware of the elephant management plan were the people that didn't live in the elephant areas or in the wildlife areas. The people that were unaware were the ones that were living with the elephants. So I thought that was pretty telling maybe of where we're going wrong and where we're forming maybe some of our policies and getting some of our information from. So I did think maybe, this is a pretty good indicator that we need to change this. Again, this is a really interesting kind of study that was published out of Save the Elephants from Ian and Aria's group. And there was a beautiful elephant documentary made And unfortunately, a lot of these beautiful documentaries are made throughout the elephant range in Africa, but actually people in Africa don't ever get to see them. They can't afford Apple TV, they can't afford Nat Geo, they don't have access to it. So there's a real disconnect. So people in the Western world go and watch it and consume it and think it's wonderful, but the people on the ground living with the animals, again, don't get to see these films. And actually, what was really amazing with this, they were like, well, we need to change that. So they did a big campaign called the Elephant Queen Outreach. And they visited over the course of 2 years over 300 schools, 200 villages, and they estimated they engaged with 135,000 people. But they made sure that this documentary was translated into all the different dialects, and there's a number of different dialects that exist in that area. And then someone did a study to work out the effect of something like this, an initiative like this. And I think the results were absolutely incredible. So 86% of community viewers felt that the film changed their attitudes towards elephants. On average, 79% of viewers believed the film would change their interactions with elephants in the future. 88% of viewers felt the film could change their whole community's relationship with elephants. So I think these are pretty outstanding results, and it's amazing the impact of a film like that when people actually have access, so then they can understand and have a little bit more empathy for elephants. And I love that they publish this work. Again, this is not an obvious mitigation. This is an NGO that's got a very long-standing relationship with the community, but I think it's a stepping stone for what could be potentially a bigger dialogue to then go on to more elephant education. And finally, again, this is produced out of Save the Elephants, but this is an amazing manual that anyone can download and access. It's a human-elephant coexistence toolbox, and there's contributions from across the world in elephant mitigations. And it's really extraordinary, down to working out what kind of conflict you're dealing with, to what kind of mitigation, to where you can find funding. It's just a wealth of knowledge that's freely accessible to anybody. And now they've gone the next step forward, where they have a small research camp in Chobe National Park in Kenya, and they actually provide training for people working on mitigation resolution in communities. So not the community members themselves, but different NGOs, different stakeholders can send people to go and be trained in this very intensive course on how to solve human-elephant conflict and coexistence. So I think it's a really interesting, new, novel way of kind of looking at this. And again, stakeholder meetings are key. Bringing people together that are working on the same issues can be super powerful and super helpful and really impactful. And again, it sounds really obvious, but we don't often do it, or we don't do it enough. And I think it's equally as important to talk about our successes, yes, but I think we all need to be talking about our failures. I think no one wants to talk about failure, but actually we learn so much more out of where we've failed. And I find that the most exciting thing to be talking about is failures sometimes, especially when you're talking with other people in the same practitioning world. I think that's enough from me. So thank you very much for your time.
That's the last one. That's the last slide.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you. I would first like to thank the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society for holding this event to celebrate World Elephant Day. And I'm also very happy that I followed Tempe's presentation, because even the last time you were here, the clear message I got is how big a role communities play in HEC mitigation. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, that is one of our weakest links, the role of community. Some of you may have heard some of my presentation, because I've been talking about human-elephant conflict mitigation from the day I can remember. So some things might be a bit repetitive, but I think it is good for us to reinforce what we have heard before. I would like to start saying that my topic is living with elephants from conflict to coexistence. I would like to define coexistence in the context of human-elephant conflict. Because there are a lot of people who feel when I say we need to coexist with elephants, and I mean outside the protected areas, if humans and elephants are sharing the landscape, we need coexistence. Many have told me, how can we coexist? We can't have elephants in our backyards. In the context of human-elephant conflict, coexistence doesn't mean having elephants in your backyard. Elephants and humans have to share a landscape, but with barriers separating them within that landscape. Sri Lanka has been trying to deal with the human-elephant conflict from 1959. The first master plan that was prepared to deal with the human-elephant conflict was by a committee appointed by the government in 1959. Since 1959, for over 60 years plus, every government has been trying different modifications of the same model of dealing with the human-elephant conflict. And the model is that we should try to restrict elephants to wildlife protected areas. For 65 years, if we have tried to restrict elephants to wildlife protected areas, and we still have an increasing conflict, there's obviously something wrong with the model. Unfortunately, people want to continue with this model because it is the easiest when it's from a political point of view. All you have to tell people is, we'll put the elephants in protected areas. So let's drive the elephants into protected areas. And we try to fence them in. Having done that for 65 years, this is the trend of annual elephant deaths and annual human deaths. So obviously, trying to restrict them to protected areas has failed, and it has failed miserably. So it is time that we start changing the conceptual model that we have been using. And some of you may have heard me saying this before. In 2020, the government at that time, the president appointed a presidential committee to come up with a human-elephant conflict mitigation national action plan. So that was the first national action plan that was really based on science. So based on that, we have proposed a separate model, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, as well as talk to you about some of the challenges that we are facing in trying to implement it. Human-elephant conflict mitigation has been approached in Sri Lanka from a human-centric point of view. If you and I have a conflict, and I'm trying to solve the conflict so that I'm happy with it, I'm pretty sure you won't be happy with it. So if we are trying to solve the conflict with two parties, we have to meet each other halfway. What we have been trying to do all this time is try to do it our way, the way humans want it solved. We think that elephants should be confined to wildlife protected areas. We have not considered the elephant's requirements. We need to consider elephant biology, their ranging patterns, and behavior when we are trying to mitigate the human-elephant conflict. What we've been trying to do is identifying areas for development outside the wildlife protected areas, and that original model said that we should drive elephants into protected areas out of development areas. So we have identified in green the protected areas, and red is the areas earmarked for development. So now we drive the elephants out of the red areas into green areas. Unfortunately, in 1959, when we came up with this concept, the knowledge and concept of carrying capacity did not exist. Can this natural ecosystem sustain that many elephants? Because protected areas have been in place for hundreds of years, and nature has a way of increasing its population to the carrying capacity of that protected area. So all protected areas in Sri Lanka, before we drive the elephants in, are at or near its carrying capacity. Now we are driving elephants from the outside areas into protected areas. So trying to drive all elephants outside protected areas into protected areas is like trying to pour a jug of water into a glass that is already full. It is impossible to do. That is why we have failed trying to do it for 65 years.
So what do we do now? We try to confine elephants into protected areas. We first drove them in. When they keep coming out, then we erected electric fences. Unfortunately, most of our electric fences are on the boundary of Department of Wildlife Conservation protected areas. Almost all wildlife conservation protected areas are surrounded by Forest Department protected areas and other state forests, right? Now, do elephants understand and relate to administrative boundaries of humans? So we have built fences in locations like this. One part is Wildlife Department land, the other part is Forest Department land, and we have the fence in between. Elephants travel on ecological boundaries, not on administrative boundaries. So now we have Wildlife Department elephants and Forest Department elephants. Okay, that's what, because most of the fences today have elephants on both sides of the fence. Basically, it's a situation like this. We erect the fence on the Department of Wildlife Conservation boundary. There are elephants in the Forest Department land. There's nothing stopping them from going into developed areas. Now, you might wonder, is the Wildlife Department off its head to try to erect fences on administrative boundaries? In fairness to the department is also faced with a lot of problems. I was there for a short time, so I know some of the problems. When you try to erect the fence on the ecological boundary, the boundary that the elephant relates to, the community feels that they may not be able to go into Forest Department land and other state forests and do illegal slash and burn agriculture. So what does the community do? They run to the politicians. What do the politicians do? They call the Department of Wildlife Conservation and say, please do not erect the fence on the ecological boundary or the boundary of the Forest Department and the other state forests, erect it on your own boundary. So the department almost has no alternative but to erect it on their own boundary. Even in the new action plan, one of the first recommendations is to relocate all the existing fences. But the Department of Wildlife Conservation is having huge problems because the same community that is affected by elephants are the ones who object to relocating the fence, because they feel the fence is an administrative boundary. That if the electric fence is put on the boundary, ecological boundary, they won't be able to go across and do their agriculture, which by the way is illegal. So the politicians of Sri Lanka for the last 50, 60 years have been allowing illegal agriculture to take place, illegal encroachment to take place in our forested protected areas. And by doing that, you are exposing the people to elephants and human-elephant conflict. So what are the lessons that we have learned after 65 years? The protected areas are at or near its carrying capacity. Confining elephants to Department of Wildlife Conservation protected areas is not possible. Erecting fences between DWC and Forest Department protected areas is unsuccessful because elephants travel on ecological boundaries. So we need a paradigm shift in the conceptual model if you need to resolve human-elephant conflict. Even the short period that I was in the department, when we try to erect fences in the right location, I have got telephone calls from local politicians and ministers who say, well, don't erect it there. Why don't you put it in that other location? So I've been trying, at that time I tried to explain to them why we can't do this, but they keep on insisting. So on 2 occasions I told 2 ministers, sure, I'm willing to relocate the fence to where you want, as long as you and I sign, when I mean I, the Department of Wildlife Conservation, signs a memorandum of understanding that against the recommendations of the Wildlife Department, you want to erect the fence where you want to. So any human-elephant conflict that arises out of that area is your problem, not ours. You have to take care of it. The Wildlife Department won't. Both ministers backed off at that point, because then it becomes their problem. They have to deal with it. They would rather put it on Wildlife Department and then blame the Wildlife Department for what they're doing. Don't think I'm covering for the Wildlife Department. I have a lot of criticisms of the Wildlife Department, and I see my friend Mr. Ranjan Marasinghe, who is Director of Operations, he and I have had enough clashes about what I think of the department. But when they need to be defended, we need to defend them. we need to stand up firm and help the department to do its job and minimize political interference. Okay. Now, if we are trying to understand elephants and take that into account when we are delivering a solution, we must first understand issues about elephants, their ranging patterns. Herds range in 50 to 100 square kilometers, which is 5,000 to 10,000 hectares. The males range in large areas, 15,000 to 20,000 hectares. During must, the range expands to 35,000 hectares because they are looking for receptive females. Also, radio collaring data that we have, the Department of Wildlife Conservation and Center for Conservation and Research, as well as other research organizations have collected over the years, show that long distance migrations among Sri Lankan elephants do not happen. Like if a migratory corridor is needed, if the dry season home range is in one location and the wet season home range is in another location. And then the elephants have to move from the dry season home range to the wet season home range, they certainly need a corridor. Whatever the problems we have in Sri Lanka, food and water is reasonably plentiful for elephants. So our elephants, none of the radio collaring data, perceptions say that there are long corridors. As a scientist, I don't look at perceptions. I look at data. Over 150 elephants have been radio collared over the last 15 years. We have not seen long distance migrations in any one of them. We have large home ranges. And within the home range, elephants need to move within that home range. And you need movement paths within that home range. Those are not long distance, right? So we need to provide those movement paths unhindered so that they can move around their home range. Since elephants consume 150 to 200 kilograms of food a day, food is a bigger issue in Sri Lanka than water. So while most politicians feel all our reservoirs have to be full so that they get more votes, as well as that's good for elephants. Actually, that is not good for elephants. If there is enough water in the reservoir, but the grasslands that have been submerged during the rainy season is exposed, and the new grass that grows, like in Min area Kaudulla, the new grass is higher in protein than mature grass. That is what attracts the elephants. So it's the food that attracts elephants to Min area Kaudulla or any other reservoir grassland dependent elephant population, and water is secondary. So we have to realize that, and we have to really cater more than for water, for food. We have also got to understand the type of habitat elephants live in. We feel primary and secondary forests are excellent elephant habitats. So now whenever there is an elephant drive, if there are problems with communities with elephants, in the Putlam, Anuradhapura area, the Wildlife Conservation Department is instructed to drive the elephants to Vilpattu. Those of you who have been in Vilpattu, particularly in the eastern side of Vilpattu, Hunuvilagama entrance, do you see a large number of elephants there? I think we have driven about 500 elephants into Vilpattu. We don't see those elephants there. Why don't we see all these elephants in Vilpattu? After all, there is nice forest, tall canopy trees. Why couldn't the elephants be there? Unfortunately, primary and secondary forest, because the canopy is covered, no sunlight comes through, and there is no grass on the ground growing. Even though an elephant is tall, the elephant can reach only a certain height of trees. So they don't have enough food in primary and secondary forests, and the density of elephants in primary and secondary forests is 0.2 elephants per square kilometer, or you need 500 hectares per elephant. Whereas if you go to scrub forest, grasslands, and abandoned chena, the population density is 3 elephants per square kilometer. Each elephant needs 33 hectares. Now do you understand why most of the elephants in Sri Lanka range outside our wildlife protected areas? Because scrub, chena, abandoned chena, and grasslands are largely outside the protected area network. So the more you try to drive elephants into the protected area network, that is not, habitat is not suitable for them, they will go out. That's why fencing elephants inside wildlife protected areas have failed. As to illustrate it, this is what primary and secondary forests look. And as you can see, the grass is full of, the ground is full of leaves and not grass. And this is what scrub forest and chain aftergrowth looks like. This is much better habitat for elephants, and elephants can consume almost everything that is there. This is the reason why, when the Center for Conservation and Research divided Sri Lanka, the entire country, into 25 square kilometer grids, and did surveys in each grid to try to see the presence and absence of elephants, this is what we get. The red areas are grids where there are humans and no elephants, so there is no conflict. The green areas are wildlife protected areas. There are no humans and there are elephants but no humans, so there is no conflict. The yellow areas are where humans and elephants share the landscape. 44% of Sri Lanka outside the wildlife protected areas have humans and elephants sharing the landscape. And this is the result of 65 years of trying to drive them into protected areas. And they are in 44% of the land outside the protected area network. If you take the protected areas also, it's almost 2/3 of the country that we have protected areas. Once again, I'm not trying to defend the wildlife department. The department, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Marasinghe, has about 1,300 or 1,500 employees. If you take 2/3 of the country that there are elephants, that's 66% of 65,000 square kilometers. That's about 5,000 hectares per employee. That is counting the DG and down to every laborer. So it's an impossible task for the department alone to try to manage this problem. See, what happens today is the development agencies make decisions on development. When conflict arises, the wildlife department is told to manage the conflict. So this new action plan tends to try to change that a little bit because of this reality. So we have to accept the fact that humans have to coexist with elephants. So how do we do that? We should explore practical ways of coexistence. Electric fences are still the best barrier, but we must keep in mind an electric fence is a psychological barrier only to keep humans and elephants separate. There are lots of small things that can be done, but not in the nationwide scale that you need to solve the human-elephant conflict. We have to realize that an electric fence is not a boundary demarcation. It is to keep humans and elephants separate. So to be effective, the elephant should be located at a boundary that the elephant relates to. And the boundary that the elephant relates to is a boundary where the ecology changes. Where the ecology that is suitable for elephants changes into development ecology. So all existing fences, according to the new action plan, all existing fences have to be moved to the ecological boundary, and new fences should be constructed on the ecological boundary. The Department of Wildlife Conservation is having huge problems right now in trying to relocate the existing fences, because people feel if you relocate the fence, they won't be able to go in to do their illegal agriculture. Actually, the fence is not a barrier to prevent people from going in. If you are stupid enough to go in and get yourself killed, good luck to you. The fence is to try to keep you separate from the elephants. But if you're insisting that you want to go in, then you have to face the consequences of it. And to be able to relocate fences, the public, the politicians, and other government agencies have to help and cooperate with the department to do that. Unfortunately, that level of cooperation doesn't exist, particularly with the community and the politicians. And if that doesn't exist and you can't relocate the fence to the right place, the fence will be unsuccessful. It will fail. So what we are basically suggesting is, the previous time I showed you this slide with the fence on the boundary of the dark green area. What we are saying is relocate it to the development boundary so that you are allowing elephants to be inside wildlife protected areas, forest protected areas, Mahaveli Authority of Sri Lanka forests, and even private forests. If you own forested land that is elephant habitat and you are not developing it, it should be inside the fence. If not, the elephants are going to come out. And like I said, the electric fence is not a boundary demarcation. So even if your private land is inside, it doesn't mean that you are going to lose the land. It means elephants can use it. The day you develop, you relocate the fence. Right? So that's what we need to do. So in areas of fragmented forest, if there is large contiguous forest patches, relocating the fence to the ecological boundary works. But there are lots of areas, particularly in the northwestern province, eastern province, north central province, where forest patches are fragmented. So putting a fence around a fragmented forest patch, you cannot keep elephants inside that patch. It's too small for them. They spend the day in that and they come out in the nights. So if you go and build a fence around it, they'll break the fence. So in those areas, why don't we protect what needs protection? In those areas, protection is needed for villagers, protection is needed for agriculture. So rather than fencing the forest in those areas without contiguous forest, fence the villagers, fence the agriculture. And these fences should be community-based village fences and seasonal agricultural fences. We are trying to utilize the community to play a role and to take ownership of protecting themselves. Basically, we consult with communities and then we put the fence around the village like this. The Center for Conservation and Research, Dr. Prithviraj Fernando's organization, has been doing this successfully for over 15 years. We have had 13 African countries that when I was in the World Bank that I managed to bring to Sri Lanka to see the concept of community fences. Almost every Asian elephant range state has visited. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get a minister to come and visit it. Right? If the fence was in a foreign country, they might go to visit it, but not in Sri Lanka. So once we put these fences around the village, and what we are saying is around the village, the peripheral houses, when you flash your torch at night, you should see the fence. Because if you see the fence, if the fence is close to your houses, when the elephants come close to the fence, we have an early warning system that is free of charge in villages. The dogs. When the elephant comes, they start barking. If you are in a house and you hear all the village dogs barking close to your house, then elephants are coming there. So in the villages that we have tried this, the villagers get together and try to chase the elephants away. Before they break a fence, it's much easier to chase them than after they break a fence. But the problem that we are having in doing this, to get the community to have ownership, the community has to be able to contribute something financially, a nominal amount. If not, there is no ownership. We have, Dr. Pruthu's group tried this by gifting the whole thing to them. It doesn't work because they don't look after it. And we are not asking for big money. We are saying pay about 3,000 rupees, one-time fee of 3,000 rupees per acre enclosed, or we prorate it according to the size of land you enclose, which is not a huge amount. But while villagers agree to do it, politicians refuse to do it. They say that, oh, these people are very poor, we can't expect them to contribute. I have told politicians, ask the people how much they spend on firecrackers to chase elephants out. That's more than 3,000 rupees a year. We are asking for a one-time 3,000 rupee contribution. And that money doesn't go to anybody, it goes into a community fund that the community organization can use for maintenance of the fence. And then every month or every year, they have to contribute a little bit of money for maintenance, because we are trying to reduce the drain on the treasury to maintain these fences. And we have at this point about 70 to 100 villages which has community fences, which have been supported by CCR, the Wildlife Department, and various donor-funded projects, and these have been pretty successful. Then I said, then try to save agriculture. Now, the biggest attractant for elephants is paddy cultivation. And the elephants come there when the paddy starts ripening. So once again, we work with the community and then come up with seasonal agricultural fences. It's a temporary fence that you put around the paddy tract, not each field. So right now in this paddy tract, if there are 50 farmers, today during the cultivation season, today all 50 farmers have to spend every night on their land. If you do this, they can take in turns. You can't do this and go to sleep. Go home and go to sleep, the elephants will come in, right? So they can take in turns and have about 10 farmers working per night, patrolling the fence. Because like I said, it's very easy to chase an elephant away before he breaks the fence and starts consuming crop. If he starts consuming crop, it becomes much more difficult to chase them away. So these seasonal paddy field fencing has been erected with GI pipes, and the farmer organization is trained how to erect it, and they are able to erect the fence within a day or a day and a half. And we tell them to erect it just before you start your cultivation, and the day after you harvest your crop, the fence has to be removed and taken away. Because once the crop is harvested, there are no people in the paddy field. They go home till the next cultivation season. If the fence is there, you're providing a training ground for elephants to break fences, because it wants to come and eat the crop residue. Now there is a fence, they learn to break the fence. Because a lot of people, public, think when you read the newspapers and elephants are getting electrocuted and dying, that these fences are killing elephants. The actual proper electric fences that are erected by the Wildlife Department or this type of fence doesn't kill an animal, it only zaps them. When you read in the newspapers that an elephant has been electrocuted, some person has taken the mains electricity and connected it to a barbed wire fence. So not only an elephant, if you touch it, you will die too. Right? So those are the elephants that get electrocuted. Electric fence designed to deter elephants, no elephant dies of that. You only get a shock. But they remember that shock. The place that I do my research in Habaran, I stay in a guest house. The owner has a small farm on the border of Min area. He has an electric fence around it. There are 2 elephants, males, who come on a daily basis and break the fence. So there are days that I spend the night there to try to figure out how they are breaking the fence. It's unique. There, of these 2, one elephant, I think, there's a kaya forest behind, belonging to the forest department. He has broken a fresh branch and come and tried to break the fence. And he got zapped because fresh branch has dampness. So today, now I notice him, if he brings a fresh branch, he throws it at the fence. If he has a dry branch, he will hit the fence with it. So you're dealing with an animal who is very intelligent, right? So that's why we don't want them to learn how to break fences. So if you take the fence away and the farm organization stores it, then next cultivation season they erect it. So now, while this model also has been pioneered by the Center for Conservation and Research, and it has been very successful. Now, who should be the government agency working with the farmers and working with the villagers? The Department of Wildlife Conservation, by its mandate, is supposed to be conserving wildlife and not protecting people and agriculture. There are over 100 government agencies protecting people. The divisional secretary's responsibility with the Grama Niladhari, the Samurdhi Niladhari, and all the staff in each village, they are the people who have close interaction with the villagers. So we are recommending that the divisional secretaries play the role from the government side with the community in permanent village fences. The agricultural fences, it should be the agency that is responsible for agriculture in that area. If it is paddy fields, it's the Department of Agrarian Development. In certain Mahavali areas, it's the Mahavali Authority of Sri Lanka. In certain areas, it's the Department of Agriculture. So they should play a role in doing that. And we have had many discussions with them, and nobody wants to take on a new role. They say it's a wildlife department's job. So I've been telling them, your staff are spending day and night trying to increase agricultural productivity. And if the elephants come and eat it, you have lost everything. So shouldn't protecting the crop also be part of your responsibility? So now we are trying to get these agencies to play a role, but unfortunately it's not that easy. Because at the head office level, you can get a circular sent down. When it goes to the field level, to maintain, now the CCR fences are very successful because for 15 years, the Center for Conservation and Research, one of their staff will at least once, initially once a week, then once in 2 weeks, then once a month, goes to the village, walks with the community around the fence, making sure the fence is maintained properly. Because for the fence to be effective, it has to be maintained properly. And for 15 years, their staff have been doing it. We can't get government officials to walk around a fence. It's too much trouble. They will ask the villagers, what do you think? Is the fence working? Yes, okay, that's fine, and they go off. So we are having problems with the divisional secretariats as well as the Agrarian Development Department, field staff, to get them to do this. Then they want allowances for doing it, financial allowances, right? So now we are trying to, the money that we are collecting from the community, trying to pay them their allowance out of that. So if you have to come up with a sustainable mechanism. If not, it won't work. So we have had some challenges of that. So in conclusion, we need a paradigm shift in our approach to human-elephant conflict mitigation. Any government, since it's election time, I'm telling you, any government or any candidate who tells you when they come into power, they will solve human-elephant conflict, doesn't know what he or she is talking about. You can solve the conflict only if there are no humans or no elephants. No politician. But you can manage the conflict to a minimal level where humans and elephants can coexist. So the reason I'm saying this is politicians also should realize not to give false promises. To be realistic, that you cannot eliminate the conflict, but you can bring it to a manageable level. For that, we need to understand elephants and their needs. We need to understand their ranging patterns. We need to understand the food requirements. And today, I was telling Mr. Marasinghe when I was talking to him at a presentation at the Zoological Gardens Department, based on some of the work that I am doing, I'm beginning to feel that elephants are not raiding crops because they have no food in the forest, particularly the males. Crop raiding is done largely by large males. They are followed sometimes by younger males. Females and herds very rarely get involved in crop raiding. If females and herds get involved in crop raiding, that is because they have nothing to eat. If not, they won't risk their calves. Because going and raiding crops is a very risky business. But the males, are they adopting a high risk, high gain strategy? What do I mean by a high risk, high gain strategy? All animals eat, drink, and reproduce. In male elephants, reproductive advantages are gained by being in mast. Longer your mast, the greater the opportunity for you to reproduce. So every male elephant wants to remain in mast as long as possible. The longevity of mast depends on your age. Older you are, longer your mast period, and your body condition. Are these large males who raid crops building up their body condition for a larger, longer mast period? I'm still working on it, I don't know the answer. But my gut feeling is that maybe that is what is happening. So they are not raiding crops because they're hungry. They are raiding crops because they get more nutrition. So that complicates solving this problem even more. So we need to keep those things in mind because we are dealing with a different species. We have to understand the species and try to work with them. And we have to understand that humans and elephants have to coexist within the same landscape. Communities and farmers have to be responsible for protecting and maintaining community-based fences. Unfortunately, we are in a dependency type of society with politicians over the decades handing out things to people. Now, many of the discussions I have with villagers and farmers, they keep saying, so why can't wildlife look after the fence? So I keep asking them, when you put a fence around your house, does the Pradesh Sabha pay for it? Do they maintain the fence for you or the parapet wall around your house? You are protecting your house. Here you are protecting your crop, you are protecting your village. Right? So you have to play a role in maintaining it, because that will be much more successful than waiting for some government agency to come and do it. So we are trying to change the mindset of people, and I really like what Tempe says, because we have to interact way more with communities than we are doing now. So if we do all that, I think living with elephants and going from conflict to coexistence is an achievable goal if we all work towards it and not expect others to do so. Because a lot of people expect somebody else to take care of your problem. You have to play a role in solving this problem. So with that, before ending, I would like to thank the Center for Conservation Research for some of the data and graphs provided by them for me to use in this presentation. And I feel that if all of us get together, communities that are in conflict areas and outside conflict areas, get together to try to make elephants an economic asset to the communities facing HEC, that is the day that they will start protecting elephants. Right now, the elephant is only an economic liability. There are ways of converting that into an economic asset. There are possibilities on the tourist route to do community-based elephant viewing tourism. The problem is, if we start a program like that, the hotels either come and they take the money because they bring the guests without giving anything to the community, or jeep drivers get involved and they take the money. But if you're trying to convert the elephants into an asset to the community has to get some financial benefits of living with elephants. In certain countries, now the China farmers, China is rain-fed. The land lies fallow about 9 months of the year. The China aftergrowth is excellent elephant habitat. But there are lots of people who say, hey, why don't we create more elephant habitat inside wildlife protected areas? The mandate of the wildlife department is not only elephant conservation, but biodiversity conservation. And like I showed you, elephants prefer degraded forest. So if you're going for degraded forest, you are depleting your biodiversity. But the China farmers are doing a great job of depleting biodiversity and doing their Chinas. Nobody is stopping them because of the votes. So let's utilize that in the off-season. Now, many China farmers are requesting the government to provide irrigation water for them. If they get irrigation water, then they'll cultivate 2 seasons. Then the China aftergrowth is lost for the elephants. But rather than trying to degrade protected areas or wildlife protected areas, the China farmers are already doing it in the China, but they are also providing a huge ecosystem service for elephants. In certain countries, there are ecosystem service fees. From the tourism revenue, a certain percentage can be channeled into a fund that you pay the China farmers in the off-season not to cultivate, so that they won't demand the government to give them irrigated water and ruin this whole system. Because right now, there's a balance. They cultivate 3 months of the year, land lies fallow 9 months. The 9 months, particularly in the dry season, is excellent elephant habitat. So we need to start thinking out of the box to try to solve this problem. And if we do so, I'm pretty sure we can get this into manageable levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you. Learned a lot from both. It's nice to see that I learned that elephants are using nutritional supplements for procreation. That's very interesting. The Botswana elephants seem to have a Sri Lankan passport because they can't cross the border. So we learn a lot every day. This time we took questions early, and we are taking questions on WhatsApp because we have two panelists and a tight schedule. So all of you, some questions came in before 071 664 6664. That's where you need to send it in. There's a team at the back end sending me some questions. We'll field a few, but not too many today because of the time. Just also to say that I want to thank Sparsilon, who partnered us for that wonderful Elephant Day celebration, the run and all of that. You would have seen those activities. And also to thank NTB for the lecture series and the support they give on our publications. On the community side, Tempe will be glad to know that the team here has been doing a lot of work with community, especially in Ahatuaba, where they've been working on the street lighting, water sources, and of course the elephant community fencing we put up there, and that's brought the elephant deaths down to 0. And so we're having some very interesting progress. No time for that. Let's get on with some questions. So short answers, if you don't mind, and we're going to first do some comparison on the laws for killing and poaching of elephants. So very quick comments from both sides. Tempe, you're the guest, so we'll always start with you. What kind of laws are there for people who are caught poaching and killing elephants? And Sumit, same question here.
Okay, so it's obviously illegal to poach an elephant in Botswana. It's a jailable sentence. Problem that we face is a lot of the people doing a lot of the poaching are coming from other countries and coming in to poach. So to then find them and prosecute them is really difficult. And actually the prosecution process is incredibly slow when you do catch poachers. So not to say it's not happening, but it is a very, very arduous, drawn out sort of process. However, with elephants with conflict in fields, farmers do shoot elephants when they find them in their fields. However, so when in fields, it's somewhat seen as defense. But if they're being shot outside of the fields, then you've got a problem on your hands. But it does happen a lot. But prosecution for poaching is our biggest issue.
Well, I think the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance in Sri Lanka also has provision for prosecuting poaching or killing of elephants. The problem we are having, and I'm sure Mr. Marasinghe can add to it if he wants to, the problem is trying to identify who did the act. Because we don't use rifle bullets to kill the elephant immediately. The elephant is shot and the elephant dies a few days later. So you have no idea where he was shot. Now we have started using jaw bombs, which is completely inhumane because this poor animal dies of starvation and thirst because it cannot drink or eat because half his jaw is blown up by putting bombs, these explosives into fruits and vegetables. Right? So when they bite into it, it explodes. So again, you can't figure out where it happened because the jaw bomb may have exploded in one place, the elephant continues moving around. The only easy one to immediately prosecute is electrification because the elephant dies immediately. That is easy to identify who is doing it. I think if I'm not mistaken, I haven't read the ordinance for a while, but there is a penalty of 150,000 to 500,000 rupee penalty for killing an elephant and between 2 and 5 years in prison. So I still feel the penalty has to be much greater because that's still not enough. Because it's not enough to deter. So we are having, while the laws are there, we are having a few problems in trying to implement it.
National problem on all areas. Okay, Tempe, next one. This conversation cropped up where Sumit also mentioned that Sri Lanka has a bit of a handout mindset going back from way back when, where people wait for everything to come to them. And even if it's protecting your crops, they expect somebody else to do it. So do you have the same kind of tendency over there? And if so, how are you guys dealing with that kind of mindset?
Yeah, we have the exact same process. Actually, we have a full compensation scheme. And from my observations, it just breeds more frustration and discontent from the communities because it's far from perfect, the compensation scheme. There's complaints that it's never enough money. There's big issues in actually receiving it. I know some farmers that wait 1 week, and then I know other farmers that wait 3 years. And they always, a lot of farmers have actually reflected and said it's more insulting than anything else. So we definitely have a handout culture, and it's definitely a very debated topic. And it's definitely not solving any kind of conflict. So there's a lot of talks about getting rid of it and scrapping it. I've heard rumors that government is wanting to do that. But again, I've been hearing that for a number of years. But I think it actually just breeds more frustration over the whole situation than anything else.
Right.
Can I add something to it?
Short one.
Bad enough we have handout culture in Sri Lanka. When we work with, I told you that we want communities to contribute a nominal amount of money towards the fencing so that they have ownership for it. When we are just getting ready to, when we are just finished convincing the community that they should contribute, the local politician comes along and says, hey, don't contribute, I'll get you the fence for free. So then the whole system falls apart.
Okay, next one. Tempe, you're going first because I know what Sumit thinks about this. So we'll give him last word. Overcrowding and the lack of discipline in wildlife parks. We're seeing that hugely in many of our parks. It's a disease or a cancer in Yala and it's spreading into the other parks, right? Do you see a similar trend in your part of the region, and how are people dealing with that? Moderately short answer, and then Sumit, because I'm sure Sumit is going to have a lot to say, but I'm wanting him to keep it tight.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had actually multiple discussions about this today and talking about different ideas. But yes, we are increasingly, especially in Chobe National Park, which is basically on the boundary of my home. As I said, tourism is huge now, and it's growing. It's getting bigger and bigger, and we're having huge problems with congestion. In fact, I was in the park hosting a group 10 days ago, and I made a comment like, "Oh wow, Chobe's become Yala." To be honest, something we were joking about, but it was very interesting because I've just been to northern Zambia and they've now implemented a very interesting ranger system, which is something we've been discussing, where the private sector within the tourism world is actually offering a vehicle and they have a whole roster system where they share the responsibility of taking a ranger to specific sightings where you might be seeing leopard or lion or the things that, that's where we have our big build-ups, and actually issuing fines and enforcing that. And they're doing that in peak season, and it's been highly effective. So it's something that we have had discussions about to see if we can try and, again, support the Department of Wildlife to do their job and make it happen.
I'm sure Sumit will have a lot to say about people who try to enforce discipline. Sumit? Yes.
Well, because of the mess in the parks of being overcrowding and bad behavior, WNPS and the Federation of Environmental Organizations and I have been involved in training jeep drivers in Yala, 980 jeep drivers in Yala, about over 1,000 jeep drivers in Minneria Kaudulla, jeep drivers in Vilpattu, Wasgamua, and just 2 days ago, 11th and 12th, we did, at least 12th and 13th, we did Kumana jeep drivers. Right? During the training, they feel that they should be doing the right thing. But we are Sri Lankan. If we can break the rules, we'll break the rules. Unfortunately, enforcement from the department side has been pretty weak. But when the department, to be honest, the only warden who is seriously trying to enforce is the warden in Vilpattu National Park. But I have got lots of telephone calls, messages, and various app groups keep sending. Now, I normally don't look at app groups, but I've been told, look at this one, there's something about you, asking me to talk to the warden saying in Vilpattu, saying that he's unreasonable. So I asked most of the people, has the warden penalized you when you did not make a mistake? No, but the slightest mistake he penalizes us. Slightest mistake is a mistake. Because where do you draw the line between a slight mistake and not? Right? At 6 o'clock, if you don't, he has started penalizing vehicles that come after 6 p.m. Right? We came at 6:03. If you allow 6:03, it will be 6:06 then. If you allow that, it will be 6:15. Because we Sri Lankans love to take advantage of a situation. So if all of us, and many of us here are wildlife enthusiasts, if all of us want our parks to be managed well, tourism to be managed well, we have to sacrifice a bit too. I hate to put it this bluntly because I'm not very diplomatic, so I'll say it like I see it. It's the wildlife enthusiasts who want rules enforced in the park, unfortunately for everybody else except for themselves. That's why they're complaining, right? So we have to learn, if we want to enforce the rules, we have to compromise. We might miss a sighting. We might miss a good photograph if we have to go out on time. We have to do that if we really want to save these parks for future generations. If our parents' and grandparents' time, if these parks were destroyed the way it is now, what is the future for future generations of Sri Lanka? So I think all of us have to make up our mind that don't make the slightest mistake. If you make the slightest mistake, don't blame the warden for doing his job. I am critical of the other wardens, by the way, because they are not doing their job. But this man is trying to do his job and he's being criticized the most. That not one person is criticizing the other wardens for not enforcing. There are app groups talking about this warden. So I would ask you all, please, if you want the problem solved, be part of the solution. Don't make even the slightest mistake. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Tempe, one for you from one of our young members. So that's great to have, kids sending us questions. Are the genes of the Asian elephant different from the African elephant?
Yeah, they are indeed. Yeah, as I said, there's 3 species. So we've got the Asian and obviously the Sri Lankan as subspecies. And then within Africa, we have the forest elephants and then the savanna elephants. So definitely different species, so different genes.
So I think a little bit of internet research can also give this young kid a lot of insight. So I would encourage them to do that. It's a great topic. Sumit, one for you. How about doing something on some kind of training for the train drivers, the engine drivers? Does that help?
Yes.
Will that help?
That might help, certainly. But however, I must try to, I think it was around 2005-06, the general manager railways was a very close friend of mine. So I have been bugging him that this, about the train accidents. Then he got so fed up of me one day, he told me, you're such a pain, why don't you come with me in the engine so that you realize the problems we have. And we went by car to Kakirawa, and from there we got in the night train and went up to Trincomalee. So since he's the general manager railways, we could ride in the engine. When the speed limit in certain areas in Habarana, the worst areas, is 25 kilometers an hour for the engine. At 25 kilometers an hour, there's slight undulating tracks. At 25, the engine doesn't pull. So you get stuck, you have to reverse back, accelerate and go. So I asked him, so why can't you give us some of the engines that you're giving in the upcountry run? He said, yes, if I do that, I won't have engines there. So there's one problem of that the engines, it's difficult for them to go at that speed. Second thing is, this is what I saw that. At 35 kilometers an hour, he instructed the driver to stop. Brake immediately. It took over 100 meters for the train to stop because of the momentum. Right? So there are some practical problems from their side. However, having said that, I have also seen the engine drivers trying to catch up time in the middle of the night when they are going through protected areas. So then they are going at 60, 70. So there is no chance for the elephants. So doing training for train drivers will be worth it if the GMR is willing to actually enforce rules if they violate the rules. Because if there is no enforcement, I am beginning to get a bit cheesed off by doing training. I do all this training voluntarily, and I have been training all the parks that I said I am the one who does the lead. I take the lead in the training, and the result is very, very, very discouraging.
Yeah. So I must confess we are having a similar experience in Yala. We've spent millions, done a ton of training, and when the enforcement piece is missing, the training effectiveness diminishes very fast. Okay, 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. I know part of this answer has been discussed in this forum before, the impact of whether beehive fencing works or not, and the conclusions have been shared here that it's not too effective. But the question really is, since elephants get electrocuted by this fence and, that causes some memory and impact,
No. I would please ask you not to say that they get electrocuted. They get a shock.
All right, they get a shock.
Which is different from electrocuted.
All right, so somebody has to rephrase this. But anyway, I think the question really is, can the electric fences be a second or third line of defense where either thorny bushes or beehive fencing or something like that is used as a first line of defense in Sri Lanka? Sumit, I'm not sure whether it will be economical or practical, but that's
I unfortunately don't have my computer. If not, I will show you. Thorny bushes don't help. You must be knowing in Yala and all, you get that white thorn which is this long, called kukulkatu, that will pierce a four-wheel drive tire. I have videotape of elephants eating it, chewing away, right? So lime trees and bougainvilleas won't do a thing to them. They don't like the smell of citrus. But you can't have 2 rows of citrus trees and expect them not to scent what is on the other side. You must have at least maybe 50 meters of citrus trees, then they may not go on to that side, but then we don't have the land to have 50 meters of citrus trees. So the reason I keep saying fencing is the most effective barrier because it can be done on a large scale. But other deterrents can be brought in to supplement it. But because land is a problem in the country, you can't do a lot of it. But you can bring in different types of deterrents to complement the fencing. Now, hanging fences are being used to complement vertical fencing. Similarly, you can have sounds that might deter the elephants, but we have to remember they get used to things very fast. And then that's why this is such a problem.
Sorry, could I just add to that? Yeah, I won't go too long, don't worry.
Don't worry.
But I mean, I think it's always in combination, and we always say try and be smarter than the elephants, even though they are incredibly intelligent. So we've had big success with the seasonal fences, and we don't call them fences, we call them ropes. It's a polywire rope that we use. It looks very similar system. And we put them up for when we have a crop growing and we take them down, but they're always used in combination with something else. And that's something else we can change season to season. So it's always about trying to keep the elephants on their toes so when they never have a chance to actually habituate to it. So that's a very different thing from a fence. That's why we kind of stay away from that terminology and we say we've got a rope that goes up. But mixing it up is absolutely key to any kind of success.
Interesting. Great. So I'm going to end up with an open-ended question so that both of you can couple that with some final comments. Call out your top 3 challenges in each area for elephant conservation that you're facing. Top 3 challenges. You can list the politicians if you want to. Sumit, you'll have to go first. Give the lady some time.
Yes. I would say I see the biggest challenge as poor or bad development planning. Okay, even though Sri Lanka is a small country, an island nation, we can coexist with the elephants that we have if we plan our development better. Unfortunately, we don't plan development. If we don't plan development, you're going to have problems. So I feel poor planning is the biggest thing. Second, we still don't, while we have done lots of research, we still don't know enough about elephants to really understand how to deal with them to minimize the conflict. I would say that is a serious problem. And I also feel that communities should be playing a role. I'm not going to waste time telling you what I think of politicians. I think everybody knows what I think of them, so I don't want to waste one of my 3 on them because they are the biggest problem. The communities also have to play a bigger role. They have to realize that they have to play a role to look after themselves. Communities have to play a role to, if you want to minimize human deaths due to the conflict, you have to be much more careful when you are in elephant-dominated landscape. So those are my 3.
Thank you. Tempe?
So yeah, I mean, it is similar, but we have obviously transboundary movements of elephants and we have conflicting land uses within that, and that creates massive issues. For instance, we can have a national park on Botswana border and then its adjacent border in Namibia can be a trophy hunting concession. So we really have these very harsh boundaries and we're really trying to minimize the harshness of the conflicting land uses, but we need the political buy-in. We have it all very well mapped out, but until the politicians will change it and actually start adopting and implementing it, nothing's going to happen. So I think that's a really, really big, very frustrating one for us. I mean,
you can call that 1, 2, 3 if you want to.
Well, and then another big one is elephants are used as a political tool in Botswana, and it's hugely frustrating. And I think a lot of people say they're speaking on behalf of communities, but they actually haven't spent enough time in a community to do that. And I get frustrated, so I kind of imagine what those communities are feeling like, because I think a lot of their frustrations is just they haven't felt heard,
or listened to over the years. And actually, when you do take the time to stop and listen and spend a lot of time there, you can find those solutions. So a lot of the frustration may be not directed necessarily at elephants. It can be directed at government and other stakeholders where they've had misdemeanors and frustrations. So I think that's something we really want to change. And yeah, hopefully we'll get there. But we're also having an election this year. So it's always a bit of a challenging time.
Good luck to us all. So on that note, and also to say in the spirit of sharing experiences, a call out and thanks to Sabah, Douglas, Hamilton, and Frank, who sent us the wonderful booklet that you put up there with 100 different ways in which communities are actually adapting to human-elephant challenges, and I'm sure there'll be some lessons learned, and that will be passed on to our team as well. So on that note, let me thank everyone. We had a nice audience, and I hope we all gain something extra, but the conversations don't end with the conversation. There's a lot of action. I remember on a day like this, we challenged Sumit with something, and we committed to training the Jeep drivers. We took on that challenge, and that's what finally led to this. So I'm sure there'll be different actions which will come out from today. To close out, can we call the Director General of the Zoological Gardens and our former colleague in this battle, Ranjan Marasinghe, to please come over here and do the honors, hand over two tokens of our appreciation to our wonderful speakers. I think he's seen a lot of Sumit today, but he's going to see Sumit and Tempe. So he's been seeing both of them the whole day. So why not have a group picture as well? Can I call upon Jihan, one of our, vocal campaigners for the benefit of elephants? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for staying on. We're 10 minutes over. Please enjoy some refreshments from Dilma outside, and there were a couple more questions. I'm sure you can grab Tempe.